Speaking at the opening of the UN General Assembly Tuesday here in New York, President Trump blasted the United Nations, saying it's, quote, not even coming close to living up to its potential, unquote. Meanwhile, Trump claimed he himself has ended 7 wars.
In a period of just 7 months, I have ended 7 unendable wars. They said they were unendable. I'm very honored to have done it. It's too bad that I had to do these things instead of the United Nations doing them. And sadly, in all cases, the United Nations did not even try to help in any of them.
Trump also called climate change a con job and warned European nations of the, quote, double-tailed monster of migration and green energy.
When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness, and that's what they did. They repaid kindness with crime. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
Meanwhile, anti-war protesters gathered outside the United Nations, urging an end to Israel's war on Gaza, coming as at least 10 countries recognized Palestinian statehood this week, bringing the number of countries at the United Nations who've recognized the country of Palestine to about 150. For more, we're joined by journalist Ishaan Tharoor. He is global affairs columnist at The Washington Post, where his latest columns are headlined, Trump versus Lula was a window into MAGA at the UN, and a Trump-shaped wrecking ball swings toward a faltering United Nations. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Ishaan. It's great to have you with us. Why don't you comment overall on President Trump's address yesterday?
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be back with you, Amy. I've covered every single one of Trump's UN speeches from his first term into now. And I think it's fair to say, in his first term, he was a bit of an object of curiosity. His appearances on the UN, you remember many moments of levity, of the audience laughing or laughing at him, sometimes with him. And I think there was an overarching impression among the UN diplomatic corps that this is an aberration, perhaps. This is a particular interlude in American politics. And now with Trump's return this year, it's very clear that he represents a certain status quo, or an emerging status quo. And in Trump's speech, as you highlighted, the 2 very coherent points he made was about the perils of immigration and the mistake in his mind of green climate policies. And he's speaking not just to his base, but to an emerging far-right base across the West. He warned about the death of Western Europe. And this is all highly unusual rhetoric to have from the dais of the General Assembly, where you're supposed to be, as the largest underwriter of the United Nations, as a prominent member state, talking about the ways in which global cooperation can solve major global challenges. But that is not something Trump cares about, and it became abundantly clear, especially as his speech went on and on and on and on, 4 times beyond the allotted time for him.
Over an hour. It's generally about 15 minutes.
It's generally 15 minutes, correct. That Trump was speaking to a far-right international around the world more than he was to the member states there in the room.
And Ishaan, you mentioned this, I think it was the longest speech ever, UN speech by an American president. And it almost seemed at times the narcissism and the lecturing of world leaders. What do you think was the impact on them, especially when he talks about migration as it's primarily a European problem, when the reality is that many countries in the global south, Iran, Turkey, Colombia, are hosting huge numbers of refugees and migrants as well?
That's right. The length of the speech was something that an Arab diplomat texted me during the speech saying, this reminds me of Gaddafi more than anybody else at the United Nations. Of course, the late Libyan dictator was somebody who came to the UN and spent a lot of time kind of amusing the audience and going on and on and on. And Trump, yes, he had he had his usual moments where he's talking about a faulty teleprompter and the escalator that didn't work, and then offering some strange asides here and there, but absolutely he came to the United Nations, a forum that's supposed to, in its function, grapple with problems that all countries share or that cross borders. And here he is talking about how to shut down borders. Here he is talking about the waste of time of the United Nations, and reviving in many ways long-standing Republican complaints about the UN that predate Donald Trump, but which Donald Trump has really accelerated a certain conversation in the United States about the U.S.'s commitments to this institution, about the U.S.'s commitments in general to the general ethos and principles of multilateralism, which is what the UN stands for. And so it's kind of accelerated the sense of an inflection point now. The UN is 80 years old. It's fair to say that it's showing its age. It's not been able to resolve conflicts for a long time. It's struggling to maintain the peace. It's struggling in many ways to fulfill some of its core mission and goals. The U.S. cuts that Trump has initiated to USAID and other programs are deeply damaging to the UN system and the international humanitarian system as well. And so you're seeing a very beleaguered UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres entering his final year. And while he may want to sort of position the UN for a future where it has to reckon with climate change, where it has to figure out the rules of the road internationally for things like AI and other advanced technologies, instead of positioning the UN for the future, he's in the midst of a really brutal regime of austerity and retrenchment, and major cuts to come next year.
And what about this claim of Donald Trump that he ended 7 unendable wars that the United Nations was unwilling to get involved with? Could you fact check that for us a little bit?
Right. I mean, I think you can go through each 7 of them, and forgive me, I don't have them all itemized in my head at this point, but my colleagues at the Washington Post have already fact-checked them. I think it's fair to say that in all 7 instances that he cited, either there was no actual war to be resolved, or the war is still raging. He talked about this peace deal that was brokered between the DRC and Rwanda, which is backing rebels in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Just yesterday, you had the president of the DRC here in New York saying, actually, the fighting is worse than it's ever been right now. The conflict between India and Pakistan, the Pakistanis recognized that telling Trump that he stopped the conflict was great for them because that's all he wanted to hear. But the Indians have a totally different narrative, and it has nothing to do with Trump ceasing hostilities. And the list goes on. What's curious, though, is in the past, in his first term, when he would tout his achievements, that would often elicit, audible laughter in the room of the General Assembly. This year, when he is patting himself on the back, declaring, and basically saying, look, I'm the great peacemaker, nothing is, I'm the great, builder of the American economy, no one's, and speaking in his customary superlatives, there was pin drop silence. And that's partially because some of those leaders in this room have felt compelled to endorse him for the Nobel Peace Prize, who have felt compelled to kind of get with the program as authored by Washington.
Ishaan, I wanted to go to the scene in the room. You wrote, a senior foreign diplomat posted at the UN, texts me, "This man is stark raving mad. Do Americans not see how embarrassing this is?" There was a problem with the teleprompter for President Trump. And White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told Fox News' Jesse Waters that it looked like sabotage and she would personally see to it that there would be accountability. And Senator Mike Lee, the Republican from Utah, called for defunding the UN for, quote, orchestrating escalator and teleprompter malfunctions. Because we should say, before the teleprompter malfunction, he had to read from his script before it went back on. As he and Melania Trump went up the escalator, it stopped. But it turned out, according to a a UN official, that someone from the president's party who ran ahead of him inadvertently triggered the stop mechanism on the escalator. Talk about those two moments.
Right. Well, I mean, you mentioned Senator Mike Lee. Senator Mike Lee has already put forward legislation earlier this year to fully defund the United Nations and to pull the U.S. out of the UN. So the fact that he's seizing on this episode to justify his longstanding, to grind his axe is funny.
I wonder if he's also calling for defunding the White House, because according to the UN, the White House was operating Trump's teleprompter.
Exactly, yeah. So it appears that the teleprompter that Trump complained about on the world stage at the dais of the General Assembly was operated by the White House and was malfunctioning, probably because of some error within his team. You heard the President of the General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock, say immediately afterwards that because of a lot of queries we're getting from delegations, we can confirm that there's nothing wrong with the teleprompter. It's working perfectly. And that was a discreet but very clear moment, and it didn't seem thereafter that any of the world leaders who spoke after Trump had any issues there either. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, on the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, again, a body that the United States was a prime mover of creating, and is still providing a significant percentage, the biggest percentage of the collective UN budget. What does this attitude of the Trump administration mean for that world body?
Well, the Trump administration's view is that the UN is too big and does too much, and its functions should be pared down to focus more exclusively on solving conflict. That's their general premise of how they approach the UN. They have a lot of particular bees in their bonnet about wings of the UN system. They've pulled the US out of the WHO, the UNESCO, the UN's cultural agency. They see whole aspects of the UN system as kind of irredeemably biased, anti-Israel, and I think this is not new. This has been a long-standing U.S. suspicion and complaint. Reagan pulled the U.S. out of UNESCO in the 80s. But successive U.S. administrations have long understood that the UN is a value add for American power. It's a platform for the U.S. to meet the world, for the U.S. to be present at every conversation. It matters for America, for an idea of American power, that the U.S. is the kind of guarantor of the UN. But that no longer is the view, the abiding view among Republicans, and there's in general, and this is in keeping with Trump's own political style and foreign policy worldview. There's a suspicion of having to operate in these kinds of institutions in the first place. He prefers transactional bilateral deal-making. The UN is not about that kind of deal-making. The UN is a multilateral forum. And so there's a kind of clash between the MAGA worldview and the whole ethos of the UN, and it's almost irreconcilable.
The big news of the week is France, Portugal, Britain, Australia joining somewhere near 150 other countries, member states of the UN, in recognizing the state, the country of Palestine. Trump repeated his criticism of their action.
Some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This could have been solved so long ago. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now.
The United States now becomes the only member of the UN Security Council not to recognize the state of Palestine. The significance of what Trump said.
It's hugely significant in that, I mean, we've seen over the course of this hideous conflict, the U.S.'s isolation, and U.S. and Israel's isolation deepening on the world stage. You've seen all these governments, especially now in Western Europe, recognizing that no one's under the illusion that making this move creates a Palestinian state, but it shows a level of political commitment to the Palestinians that many believe is necessary. And it's a reminder to Israel that what Israel is doing won't be ignored, and the extent to which Israel is basically destroying the conditions for a Palestinian state. In the minds of a lot of European diplomats I've spoken to, there has to be some kind of consequence to it. Now, I think you could turn around and say the fact that the U.S. has blocked Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas from even coming to the UN this year, that it sort of just scoffs at these kinds of moves. It does also illustrate a bit of the weakness of the UN system, that you have a veto-wielding Security Council member just standing in the middle, standing in the way of any kind of political progress at the UN on this issue. And it shows to a certain extent the fact that, for all our discussions of a post-American world or the decline of American power, if the U.S. wants to position itself in an antagonistic way, it still will get what it needs. It still will be effective.
I want to end where the UN General Assembly began, as it does every year, with Brazil. In Trump's UN address, he said he interacted briefly with the Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who spoke before him, gave the opening address at the General Assembly. Trump said the two will meet soon. Trump said the two had, quote, excellent chemistry, saying it's a good sign. This comes after Trump imposed new 50% tariffs on Brazilian imports over the prosecution of former Brazilian president, Trump ally, Jair Bolsonaro. Earlier this month, Brazil's Supreme Court sentenced Bolsonaro to more than 27 years in prison for plotting a military coup after his election defeat in 2022. Trump also sanctioned the Supreme Court justice who led the probe into Bolsonaro, now as well sanctioned the judge's wife. President Lula opened the UN General Assembly just before Trump spoke.
There is no justification for unilateral and arbitrary measures against our institutions and our economy. The attack on the independence of the judiciary is unacceptable. This interference in internal affairs is aided by a subservient far right that longs for its former hegemony. Before the eyes of the world, Brazil sent a message to all aspiring autocrats and those who support them. Our democracy and our sovereignty are non-negotiable.
Ishaan Tharoor, your final response on the significance of what Lula said.
Well, it was a very striking set piece to have Lula precede Trump, to have Lula almost directly attack the United States for its unilateral actions against Brazil. He spoke about the meticulous way in which the judiciary has operated in Brazil and the unfairness of the U.S. bullying of Brazil. He also, he has spent many interviews telling us that if Trump was Brazilian, he would be under arrest and perhaps imprisoned for his role in the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the Capitol, and that it's a testament to Brazilian democracy, as opposed to American democracy or the American system, that Bolsonaro received the justice that he did. Now, if there's going to be some kind of softening or thaw, it's unclear. I have heard from the Brazilians that there are no immediate plans for Lula and Trump to meet. So whatever Trump touted from the General Assembly, it's a bit unclear if there'll be any follow-through from that.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.